Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is a little bit something different. I'm going to be ranking the Predator films from worst to best. Now, before I get started, I want to give a special shout out to Gavin for coming up with this concept. He left a comment, asked me whether or not I would be interested in doing a Predator ranking video, and here we are. Now, before I go any further, I want to mention that I'm not including the Alien vs. Predator films because I consider those to be a part of their own franchise. I don't really consider them to be solely a part of the standalone Predator series. That's what I'm focusing on for this video. I might do another video in the future just sharing my thoughts on both films because I do have a lot to say about Alien vs. Predator in particular and Requiem. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just sticking with the 5 Predator films that we have now. Or, yeah, 5. Because you have Predator, Predator 2, Predators, The Predator, and Prey. Now, let's start with the very bottom. The bottom of the barrel, so to speak. And at the bottom of this list is undoubtedly The Predator. This film is a gigantic pile of space trash. This film is horrible. It's an embarrassment to the franchise as well as to fans of the series. I mean, I could go on for an hour when it comes to the many different things that I find wrong with this movie, or the many reasons why I absolutely hate The Predator. But I don't want to be here all day, so I'm just going to summarize a few of them. First off, Shane Black's direction is very disappointing, considering his own involvement in the Predator franchise. You would think he would put a little more effort into things. Equally as disappointing is his writing. I don't know what happened, but the humor here is absolutely pathetic and cringe-inducing. And he had shown a tendency to write good characters in the past and also have really big gonzo crazy action set pieces, but none of that is really in the Predator. You don't have likable, strong, charismatic characters, even though there's a ton of different characters in this film. You also don't have memorable, exciting, thrilling action sequences either that feature a lot of creativity. The screenplay is also incredibly insipid and dumb, and that isn't something that just falls on Shane Black. It also falls on his writing partner, Fred Dekker, who I was rooting for from the very beginning. I heard that he was attached to the project because I'm a fan of his. The Monster Squad is one of my favorite films. I'm a big fan of Night of the Creeps. I've met Fred Dekker in person. I've shook his hand. I've gotten his autograph. I always felt that he deserved another chance, and he gets that chance, and then he blows it. I mean, he and Shane Black might as well have taken a double-decker dump right in my face, because this script was that shitty. I mean, autism as a superpower. The Predators are not just taking spines for trophies or for fun. This time around, they're doing it for harvesting DNA and the traits of the people that they hunt, which is completely moronic, because what purpose does that serve for a alien hunter who's stronger and faster and better than any human that it's hunted? And really, the Predator's gonna try to take the autism away from this autistic kid and then use it as a benefit? I just this fucking movie, man. It's the Predator killer. It punches the Predator's head off and then shoves it up everybody's ass. It's so unbelievably bad. on every level. It's boring despite the fact that it tries to have a lot of different things going on. Uh, I gotta mention how unfunny it is because it truly is. It is so bad. It's like a Marvel movie gone horribly awry when it comes to its sense of humor. And it's a waste of some talented cast members like Thomas Jane, who should have been in another Predator film, and I'll get to that later. But yeah, The Predator can suck my balls. Fuck that movie. Um, the next film on my list is what might be a controversial inclusion, or at least when it comes to this place on the list to some. But this is my list, and this is where I have it. Prey. Prey to me is the second worst Predator film in the Predator franchise. And even if I did include the Alien vs. Predator films, it would still be the second worst. Because it's just so horribly underwhelming. It's such an underwhelming, forgettable, below average movie. Other than one or two scenes, there's nothing to this film. It doesn't even live up to the full potential of its concept. It does a really bad job with the characterization and build up of its lead in Naru. She comes across as spiteful and annoying at the start. She fails constantly, which is fine because you're trying to build something up, but then you never see that moment where she builds herself up as a hunter. She says she's a great hunter, but then all that you see on camera is her failing, and then all of a sudden, she's now Jane Wick or Black Widow combined in terms of their abilities, and it's just laziness on the part of the screenwriter. And it just makes Naru's evolution as a character really disappointing. And speaking of disappointing, the Predator itself, they're trying to build it up with a slow build by having the Predator hunt all these animals and then have it hunt humans. But when it's hunting humans, other than the sequence of the French hunters, it's getting its ass kicked most of the time. So it doesn't have the same intimidation factor that the Predator has in this film, or the Predator has in Predator 2, or the Predators had in Predators. And on top of that, the Predator is written as a complete and total idiot. He's a total Nimrod because he doesn't know how his own tech works, or he forgets how it works conveniently for the sake of the screenplay. I mean, this really rears its ugly head in the film's ending, where the Predator winds up killing itself with a fatal bout of idiocy. And there are other things that are just really dumb. Like, it's the stuff that initially didn't bother me, but then the more I thought about it, it started to bug me. For instance, the flower power, where Naru took a flower to lower her body temperature so she could fool the Predator. Similar to what Arnold did in Predator with the mud. But here, it completely lowers her body temperature to the point where you can't see any heat signature. Which it made sense with mud, but with a flower, like, it would make sense that it would lower your body temperature, but not to the point where you're basically a corpse. So that was pretty far-fetched. Just as far-fetched as Naru becoming an expert warrior and fighter without really any way to train herself other than training by herself in the woods. But, you know, that's just me personally. Also, her whole arc is just not really that compelling. Even the way that it all ends, it's almost like something where it ends with a pretty bow on it. Oh, she beat the Predator, she defeated the evil, she showed her worth, and now she's the leader of her tribe, and she's got this confident smile on her face, which is quite a contrast compared to the ending of Predator, where Dutch Schaefer is completely dejected, dealing with survivor's guilt, uh, hurting inside and out. Or Lieutenant Harrigan's character, Danny Glover, at the end of Predator 2, who's in a similar situation. I mean, you gave her the Disney princess ending, essentially, which kind of makes sense because the director mentioned that his pitch to Disney was an R-rated Disney princess film. That was his pitch when it comes to Prey, so I guess it kind of fits. But yeah, I'm just not that impressed with Prey. The more I think about it, the less I am enthused by it. By the direction, the performances, Amber Midthunder is still incredibly mediocre. I don't understand why so many people are praising that performance and saying it's great. What is so great about it? She can't even deliver a convincing war cry. Uh, the rest of the cast is nothing special in terms of their performances. Um, Other than that one scene with the French hunters and maybe couple bits with the final battle between Naru and the Predator, what was so great about Prey? What was so phenomenal about it? I would really like to know, because I just don't see it. I just do not see it with this film. Now, the next film that I have on my ranking list is Predators. Now, Predators is a film that I have tried time and time again to get into, but each time I am disappointed. I saw this in the theater, and initially I actually liked it. So I'll kind of go backwards a little bit on that statement. I've tried time and time again after I saw it in the theater to get into it, like I did when I saw it in the theater, but to no avail. And I think in large part that's due to the fact that I enjoyed the theatrical experience more than the film itself when I saw it in the theater, because I saw it with my dad and I enjoyed the experience of seeing a film with him in the theater, and he enjoyed it and he was having fun. So it was kind of one of those things where we fed off of one another. And that can kind of happen sometimes with films, even on the opposite spectrum, because I saw 22 Jump Street, for instance, with my parents, and they were not into it and they weren't laughing, and I just kind of wasn't really as entertained by it, and I didn't think it was as funny. But then I decided to watch it by myself without my parents, being kind of a buzzkill when it comes to that movie, and I found it to be hilarious and I really enjoyed it. So sometimes the experience can be a positive as well as a negative. So in order to really appreciate a film fully, to me, you kind of have to watch it at least once by yourself. And Predators I've seen numerous times by myself. And the most recent time was actually in 4K, and the higher definition didn't improve any of the film's flaws. Instead of going with Neil Marshall, they went with a relative unknown in Nimrod Antal, and I think that was a huge mistake, because I think Nimrod Antal's direction is pretty awful. It's at best mediocre, at worst very firmly below average. Definitely shows up in any sequence that has any sort of action in it or tension. It's one of those things where I think either they should have stuck with Neil Marshall or they should have let Robert Rodriguez direct the film. He was one of the producers. Troublemaker Studios, I think, financed the film, was a co-financer of the movie. At this point, I mean, might as well just let him do it, because at least, you know, he's a name. It would have been interesting to have seen Robert Rodriguez's vision for a Predator film, even at this point in his franchise. Definitely would have been a better bet than a relatively unknown filmmaker and Nimrod Antal for the next entry in the Predator franchise all these years later, especially a film that was supposed to kickstart a potential new franchise for 20th Century Fox, a new series of Predator films. And I get maybe what they were trying to do is maybe catch some sort of lightning in a bottle, which sometimes happens with certain filmmakers. For instance, John McTiernan was a relatively unknown filmmaker when he was hired to do Predator, but John McTiernan was clearly a much more talented filmmaker. He just didn't really have uh, uh, the project to really showcase those talents with a bigger budget and with more to work with. Um, Nimrod on Tall didn't really show much of anything like that, even with his prior films, and definitely not afterwards. So, yeah, Nimrod's direction is definitely one of the weakest aspects of Predators. I like the way the film starts out; it throws you right into the action, but then it quickly devolves into a very uh, dull and fairly slow-paced, inferior clone of Predator. Another thing that I found to be fairly weak and subpar is the score, because the majority of this score is just a carbon copy of Alan Silvestri's music in Predator. It's another thing that makes a film ineffective and just makes it feel like a really half-assed clone of Predator. It really does. It makes it feel very derivative. And I get trying to have a little bit of that music in there as a callback or as a little bit of respect to Silvestri's work and what it means to the franchise, but not to the extent where you were cannibalizing it. And that's really what happened with Predators. The entire score is mostly cannibalized from Alan Silvestri's music in Predator. Predators, it is. It's an inferior Predator clone, right down to the structure of the plot, to lines of dialogue, to callbacks, to even Long Tall Sally at the end credits, and the stuff that it tries to do that's more its own and more unique. It doesn't do as much with it as I think it could have. There are certain things that it just drags out too much, like the whole stuff with Topher Grace's serial killer character. Like, come on now. It kept trying to trick you to think that he's just a normal guy and he's not a serial killer. And give me a fucking break. We all know the reality here. He's a killer. Why else would he be on this Predator planet? And speaking of the Predator planet stuff, what a letdown. You take things to the Predator planet, and instead of having a new looking environment, it's just the jungle again. Also, the Predators, even though there's more of them, they don't really do a whole lot. Like, they send their predator dogs and these other things after them. Like, I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to be like a slow burn, like the first movie. So that's why you don't have a predator really attacking or doing anything to anyone until like the first 40-something minutes. But Predator, it worked because that's the first Predator film. So it works that they're building up to it. This is the third film in the series. That shit isn't going to cut it anymore, especially when you're just giving these lame predator dogs and a scene where some dead guy's trap gets set off and nobody gets hurt. Like, if you were going to do that with the trap thing, why don't you have somebody get hurt at least? It just made the whole scene seem pointless. Just like the whole dragging the audience along with Topher Grace's character in terms of his true intentions. Also, none of these characters are really that likable or charismatic on the same level as the cast in Predator or Predator 2. You have a good eclectic group of characters who have varying different sort of abilities and skills, but you forgot to give them a personality. That's why I think even if the film's biggest miscasting, which was Adrian Brody as Royce, even if that was fixed and you cast Thomas Jane, for instance, as Royce, the film would still not be good because of the fact that the writing would still not give someone like Thomas Jane enough lines and enough moments for him to really show his inherent charisma. But I still think Thomas Jane would have made it a little better, even with this screenplay, because Adrian Brody was that awful. He was that atrocious in this role with his tough guy voice. It was so fake, and every scene that he was in, I did not believe it at all when it comes to him being this badass soldier. It was even less believable when he took out the super predator by himself with, I think, like a axe and what looked like not really that much mud on himself. I remember in Predator, Arnold completely covered his entire body in mud to the point where he was totally brown. And Adrian Brody here is just looking like he's just got a nice facial at the spa or some shit. But yeah, I'm not a fan of Predators. I mean, even some of the positives are inherently kind of a negative, like Derek Mears's performance as the original Predator, because he doesn't really get to do a whole lot. He gets his ass kicked in a very one-sided fight with the Super Predator because Robert Rodriguez decided that he wanted to give the fans of the franchise a giant middle finger. Be like, oh hey, the Predator species from this movie and from this film that you're a fan of, well, fuck that Predator. That Predator sucks. My Predator is better. I'm like, no, fuck the Super Predator. That thing isn't nearly as iconic or as memorable as the Predator in Predator or Predator 2. No matter how much Robert Rodriguez tries to overcompensate. It's just one of those things where, yeah, Predators just doesn't work for me. I know there's a lot of people who like it, but I just find it to be boring for the most part. The action in it is completely forgettable, really has nothing in terms of real thrills or chills. The characters, they aren't really that well written or fleshed out. There are some good ideas, like Lawrence Fishburne's character, but even that feels like a waste. Yeah, Predators, it's not as bad as Prey or The Predator, but it's still not really that good either to me. So, the next film on this ranking is the second best film in the series for me, and one that I find to be criminally underrated and easily one of the most underrated sequels, if not films, out there. Predator 2. Predator 2 with Danny Glover, Bill Paxton, Maria Conchita Alonso, Gary Busey, Ruben Blades, fun cameo by Martin Downey Jr. Predator 2 is every bit of a classic as the first film in so many different ways. In a lot of ways, it could kind of be 1B to Predator, which could be 1A on this list, because I love Predator 2 that much. I've always enjoyed Predator 2 ever since I was a kid, watching it on VHS and on DVD. I really thought that Danny Glover did a absolutely phenomenal job as Lieutenant Harrigan. I thought he was a badass. I thought he's held his own. I don't understand why people say shit like he's out of shape and he's lame. I don't get that at all. I thought he was very energetic and just a lot of fun to watch. And when it comes to the scenes where he's a man of action, I thought he pulled it off. And the rest of the cast really complemented the film very well. Stephen Hopkins did a spectacular job directing the movie, especially when it comes to the film's action sequences and when he's trying to showcase the scenery and the mood and the atmosphere of the big city. Speaking of the big city, I like the fact that it takes place in a different kind of jungle, in the urban jungle. I don't understand criticisms that I still hear to this day. The Predator 2 sucks because it takes place in the city instead of the jungle again. Well, Predators took place mostly in the jungle, and that sucked. So, just because it's in the jungle doesn't mean that it's a better Predator movie. Also, Why the hell would you want the same shit again anyway? And tying into that, I've also seen people say this is bad because it stars Danny Glover instead of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm like, Arnold had the pick between this and T2, if I remember correctly. I don't know about you. I think I'd rather see him in T2. Maybe it was T2 or maybe it was Total Recall. I don't remember which one. I think it was T2 though, because he couldn't do both. And plus, it gave Danny Glover a chance to be a star and be a lead in a franchise instead of being a co-star, like in the Lethal Weapon films. And I thought he carried the film really well. Fuck yourself! Like, I love Harrigan. He's a great character. Danny Glover did a great job with that character. And Kevin Peter Hall came back as the Predator, and I love the fact that the Predator here is younger, and he's brasher, and he's a Predator who takes more risks, and has different kinds of weapons. In a lot of ways is a little more ruthless than the Predator in the first movie. I like the subtle differences between the Predators. Between Predator and Predator 2. I like the additions to the Predator lore that Predator 2 brings into the fold with the rifle and with the other Predators to show up at the end. I like how Harrigan guts the Predator like a fish with its own blade. Shit happens. And I love the fact that this movie is just breakneck when it comes to its pacing. As soon as it picks up its pace, it never relents, and it's just a non-stop thrill ride. Predator 2 is a kick-ass classic in my eyes. I mean, even Alan Silvestri comes back and does another really memorable, good score. I mean, what about this film is so shitty? I've seen people rank this at the bottom of their Predator franchise list. What? How in what way is Prey or The Predator better than this? Film where Danny Glover's got a shotgun and is pumping the Predator full of lead. Or a sequence where the Predator uses its smarts and its intelligence and flips its vision so it can see in a different form of vision that isn't heat vision. Because Keyes, Gary Busey, and his guys are trying to outthink the Predator and trying to trap it, and the Predator's like, not so fast, and he turns it around on their ass and looks through a different type of vision and just hunts them down like a badass. I mean, this Predator got its arm cut off and still kept coming, still kept going. Didn't go down like a bitch, like the Predator, the Super Predator did when its arm got cut off in Predators. But yeah, I just don't get it. I don't understand the hate for Predator 2, and I don't get why it's so low on people's lists. It's not that bad. In fact, it's really good. It's got a lot of creativity as well when it comes to the different sequences involving the Predator hunting people, like the subway scene with the strobe lights. I could go on and on and on and on about my love for Predator 2, but I'm just going to leave it at this particular point here and move on to 1A, the top of the list, Predator, the one that started it all. The 1987 action sci-fi horror classic. This is one of those films that, other than the corny end credit sequence, which really does look like an 80s sitcom, and maybe a couple other nitpicks, is as close to a masterpiece as you can get when it comes to its genre. It's one of those movies that perfects the slow burn. And even then, it's not necessarily strictly just your regular slow burn, because it has one absolutely stupendous, mind-blowing action sequence prior to that. The sequence where Dutch and his team take out the Colombian stronghold, so to speak, that is one of the most badass action sequences in all of cinema. If that sequence does not get your adrenaline pumping, you are a robot or you're dead. Because there's no way that sequence is incapable of getting your adrenaline pumping. Because that is just a pure adrenaline rush. And this is a film that really did a great job subverting expectations because of the fact that you have a cast of these badass, larger than life action hero kind of guys. You've got Arnold Schwarzenegger, you got Carl Weathers, you got Jesse Ventura, but then you also have equally as strong performers and characters when it comes to other members of the cast. You've got Sonny Landham, you've got Bill Duke, and a few other performers who aren't what you would call your typical badass action heroes. But when they are teamed together, they're a force to be reckoned with. And I love the fact that the script shows them kicking so much ass like it's something straight out of a typical 80s action movie, and then it just completely turns things on its head by having this predator just hunt them one by one and turn it into, in a lot of ways, a paranoia suspense thriller where they don't know where the hunter is or who's going to be next, and it creates some really great suspense. And the fact that you showed these guys kicking metric tons of ass earlier before they get taken out, it makes the moments when they get hunted all the more effective and all the more powerful. It also helped that the Predator was a great looking design, iconic design by Stan Winston. Did it last minute because the original design was way too goofy to be taken seriously. So Stan Winston and his team did a last minute redesign, and you got the iconic look that we have today. And when the Predator just reveals itself, even without the moment where it takes its helmet off, when it's got its helmet on and it's just moving around, it has a certain presence to it that's very fearsome. And then when it takes its mask off, like, it's terrifying. Especially the fact that you got Kevin Peter Hall, who's like over 7 feet tall, and now when he goes toe to toe with Schwarzenegger, Schwarzenegger looks small, which was a very tough task during this time period, or just a tough task period to make Schwarzenegger look small in a movie. And Predator managed to do that. And I love that Dutch uses his wits and sets all these traps and builds a bow and arrow and lures the Predator to him. And even with all of that, he just barely escapes with his life. He barely wins the battle. I love that. I love the fact that he doesn't make quick work of the Predator and what seems like no time flat, like Nauru, for instance, and Prey. There's definitely more of a struggle. He's getting punched and he's just bleeding profusely. He's getting his ass handed to him. He just manages to survive by the skin of his teeth. He doesn't just get tossed around a couple times and then get back up with not really no scratches and then just go back to stabbing and killing and then wins the battle because the Predator is an idiot. I like the fact too the Predator is smart. The Predator is cunning like the Predator should be. And the film is also a lot of fun to watch because of these different cast of characters and the way they interact with one another. Their lines of dialogue are very memorable and iconic in terms of the one-liners and their banter with one another. And you've got the thunderous score by Alan Silvestri, which is amazing and just elevates the film to an even higher level of quality. John McTiernan's direction is terrific, especially for a guy who prior to this didn't really direct a whole lot. He did a film called Nomads that not a lot of people remember, and not a lot of people have seen. And No one really thought that McTiernan was like the next big thing who would go on to do films like Predator and then follow it up with Die Hard and then The Hunt for Red October, and one of the most impressive trifectas when it comes to any filmmaker and their filmography. So yeah, Predator is, in a lot of ways, it's the pinnacle. It's the pinnacle of its genre. It's the best sci-fi action horror movie out there. I can't think of another one that's better. So the only sci-fi action horror film that comes close is kind of Predator 2, because they're both equally thrilling and entertaining in their own ways. And Predator is a different animal than Predator 2. Predator has that big bombastic action sequence, but then it's really more of a slow burn. Predator 2 is more of a consistent uh, lightning pace. It's more rushed, more frenetic, and that has its own merits as well. So it's just one of those things. It just depends on what kind of Predator film you're in the mood for. Are you in the mood for the Predator film that takes its time with not only the predator stalking its prey, but also the reveal of the creature? Or do you want a Predator film where it just goes in, guns blazing, and starts throwing spears and starts the body count from the very first few sequences and then just continues throughout all the way until the end credits? It just depends on what kind of Predator film you're in the mood for. And even though this is ultimately my ranking, if you disagree, that's fine. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Different opinions are what keeps this world interesting. But yeah, this is my ranking. Number one, Predator. Number two, Predator 2. Number three, Predators. Number four, Prey. And number five is The Predator. So anyway, thank you for watching my video where I rank the Predator films. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.